there is no metastasis. There's just new storage place because the original place got full. Once that happens and you put garbage in the tissue, it can't structure the water. There's no charge. Now you have dead, disorganized, stinky, nasty tissue, otherwise known as cancer.
I gotta get myself a little more faith, a little more love.
I'm your host, Krista Bigler, and I'm going to guess we have at least one thing in common, that we're both in pursuit of a less stressed life. On this show, I'll be interviewing experts and sharing clinical pearls from my years of practice to support high-performing, health-savvy women in pursuit of abundance and a less stressed life. One of my beliefs is that we always have options for getting the results we want, so let's see what's out there together.
Just keep breaking. I gotta get myself a little more faith, a little more love.
All right, today on the Less Stressed Life podcast, I am joined once again by Tom Cowan. I don't know if he likes me saying this, previously a general practicing medical doctor and the author of at least 6 books. He can correct me if there's more now. One of which we've talked about before on the podcast called Human Heart, Cosmic Heart. I believe the podcast episode was the same name. And this is actually a little bit of a disruptive episode that gained, which I think, I don't know Tom, but maybe he has been called a disruptor in the health space, right? Just someone who brings new thoughts and questions to the space. And so it was a bit of a disruptive episode that, not in a bad way, but like this disrupts my thought patterns that I have or the things that I've generally believed to be true. And that gained a lot of really interesting attention on our YouTube channel. And so it was just kind of intriguing, funny, overall neutral. So today we're back to talk a little bit about Tom's other book or another topic that he has written about. The book is called Cancer and the New Biology of Water. And today we're talking a little bit about water and structured water and how Tom arrived at some of these thoughts. And so we're looking for him. We actually had one other structured water episode. I did not feel that it made sense to people. And so I'm looking forward to kind of making more sense of structured water with Tom today. So welcome to the show.
Okay,
Here we
I
go.
think I got it.
All right, cool. Structured water is part of what your book, when did this book, Cancer and the New Biology of Water, come out?
97, 98.
Oh my
No,
gosh.
no, 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 no. 17 or 18,
Oh,
2017 or 18.
just like 20 years difference. No big deal. 2017, 2018. What was the reason that you wrote this book?
The same reason I write all the books is because the normal way that I had learned and the normal way that biology and medical doctors have come to understand a various issue turns out to be incorrect. And so I thought I would do my best to set the record straight.
When did you first learn about structured water, would you say?
I met Jerry Pollock
Mm.
probably 12 to 15 years ago. So that's when I first heard about it. I had thoughts about it before that based on my own observations, but there was no like formal concept that I knew about until I met Jerry Pollock.
Mm. Okay. So will you share with us, in as simple terms as possible, how can we define structured water from regular water? Some people, I mean, this is a topic people do not agree about, right? That they're like, hey, it's just like regular water. I've heard a variable arguments about it. And I have a few thoughts based on my own experimentation with structured water. And so that's where some of our questions will come from today. But tell us in general how to define structured water and what are some other names for it? Maybe is it Jerry Pollock who also calls it exclusion zone water as well?
Yeah, I mean, you could say there's disagreement about it, but not of anybody who actually thinks because it's obvious and it's just the reason there's disagreement about it is because people have not don't understand what you're talking about. So it's very simple. We are told in, early education, or better put, early indoctrination, that there's three phases of matter, right?
Mhm.
Solid, liquid, and gas. So if you take copper, there's solid copper, there's molten or liquid copper, and then there's gaseous copper. And that's with salt. I mean, I don't know that salt actually has a liquid phase, but every substance allegedly has those three phases, right? That's what
Mhm.
we
Yes.
so so does water. Water has there's ice, that's the solid, water, liquid, that's the liquid, and then steam, that's gas, right?
Right.
So what is Jello? 97% water. Which phases?
Jello. Gel.
I mean, if that what we learned was true, you'd have to choose one of those, a multiple choice question.
Mm. Yeah, solid, I guess, but it's not quite solid. It also
It's not
moves.
solid,
Mm.
doesn't have any of the physical attributes of ice, which is the solid phase.
Mhm.
So, if you want to argue that there's a dispute over whether there is a fourth phase of water, then you need to come up with an explanation of what Jello is, because there isn't one. It is a different gel like, different, or, the bond angles are different. The X ray crystallography is different. Everything about it is different than either liquid water or ice, or certainly steam. So the fact that there is a fourth phase of water, and then you could call it structured, coherent, exclusion zone, or whatever you want, but there is a fourth phase of water, period.
Mhm.
If you don't agree with that, then I wouldn't listen to anything the rest of this, because you're in make believe land, and facts don't mean anything to you, in which that's fine, but it doesn't help.
Yeah.
So the reason I first started thinking of this, I was an ER doctor for a while. And it's insofar as we were told anything about water in medical education, we were told that our cells are, made of water, and 90% of the volume is water or more. 99% of the molecules in our body are water. And so essentially we're bags of water with structure, right? And stuff like proteins and minerals. Now, the first thing about that is it doesn't feel like that,
Mhm.
right? Doesn't feel like you're sloshing around, or if you poke it, that it feels like any bag of water that I've ever felt.
Right.
But I've had the experience of seeing people bayoneted and shot and all kinds of stuff in the ER. And you know how many people squirted out water from their body?
None.
None. So where's the water?
Mhm.
There isn't any.
Yeah.
What happens if you bayonet Jello?
It does not squirt water.
Right. Nothing. You get
Mhm.
a hole in the Jello. And so it turns out that all of the water inside the cells is in this Jello like fourth phase. It's the only thing that makes any sense, because otherwise it would be liquid floating around, in which case the entire biochemistry is incorrect,
Mhm.
right? They say that our cells are membrane bound bags of water.
Mhm.
Now, the next thing that I investigated was, and this was with the help of a guy named Gilbert Lay.
Mm.
So, one of the crowning achievements in biology and medicine in the 20th century was the elucidation of membrane bound pumps and receptors, opiate receptors, serotonin receptors. And the granddaddy and the crowning achievement of that was the sodium potassium pump.
Mm.
It is one of the most important discoveries in medical science in the 20th century. Nobel Prizes, they've got it down to so there's a membrane bound, it's in the membrane, and it's kind of a whirligig. So it binds to the potassium on the outside and the sodium on the inside, spins around, and deposits the potassium on the inside, the sodium on the outside. That's why you have an unequal distribution of sodium and potassium, and that gives the cell a charge, which means it's electrified, which is why you see an EEG or an EKG or an EMG. That's the origin of the electrical charge in the living system, this difference in the ionic potential, right? This is
Yes.
very important. There's
Yes.
drugs that work on the sodium potassium pump, etc. So I went looking for a picture of it, right? I mean, if you tell me there's cats in the world, I would say, let me see a picture, unless you could show me a real cat.
Mhm.
Uh, if you say I can't show you a real cat and there's no photographs of cats, I start worrying that maybe you made that up,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe
Now
like
you can draw a
humans.
picture of it and you say this looks like a cat, but if you then I would say, how do you know it looks like a cat if you've never seen a cat? And they
Yes.
might have a reason, like that's what their Aunt Hilda said or something, but it doesn't mean it's true. So if you go looking through for an electron microscope picture of any sodium potassium pump or any membrane bound receptor, doesn't exist.
Mm.
No matter how much resolution, even though the size of the pump is supposedly able to be resolved in an electron microscope image. But there's no pump. There's no whirligig. There's no pump.
Mhm.
Okay, well, they say what the way they stain it and freeze it and the dyes, maybe that's like dissolves the pump.
Mhm.
Fine. Okay. So the next thing that I ran across, this was from Gilbert Ling. He did something which is obvious, which is so what is the membrane around jello?
I'm not sure.
Right, nothing. There is no membrane around jello, right?
Mhm.
It just kind of ends where the jello ends.
Mhm.
There's no like you could put a special coating on it. You wanted to make a fancy jello, but that's not part of the jello,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
It
right.
doesn't really have a membrane or a cell wall.
Mhm.
So if the cells are also jello, maybe they don't have a cell wall either or a membrane,
Mm.
which changes everything.
I know, it actually disrupts a lot of feelings I have, which I'm just gonna have to wait to talk through, but, I'm, like, over here, "Oh, okay, got lots of questions about
Mhm.
sodium potassium pump," which apparently we have no picture of, so we're not sure if it's real.
So here's what he did. He took some cells and he peeled off the outer layer, right?
Mhm.
Now, if that's where the pump is, then that should change the distribution of the sodium potassium. In other words, it should equilibrate like just like, like if you put salt in one side and distilled water in another side of a membrane, it will equilibrate if the salt can move from one compartment to the other until they're equal concentration, right?
Yep.
That's obvious.
Mhm.
As long as the salt can move. So if you take the membrane out, then there should be nothing between the liquid cytoplasm and the outside, and it should equilibrate. But what the reality is, it doesn't change the concentrations at all. In other words, he just proved that the distribution of sodium potassium not only has nothing to do with a pump, it has nothing to do with the membrane. And that's proof because if you take the membrane off and it doesn't change the distribution, then the distribution did not come from the stuff you took off, unless you have some other way of doing logic, which I don't know about. Uh, if you say that the reason, a cat can jump is because of a trampoline, and you take the trampoline away and the cat jumps the same, it's not the trampoline.
Yeah.
That's called actually logic. So there is no sodium potassium pump. There is no any membrane bound receptor. In which case, how does one explain the distribution, which interestingly is lost in cancer? So
Uh,
a normal cell is charged, and a cancer cell is like a dead battery. It loses its ability to maintain a charge, and that charge keeps the cells essentially from clumping together,
mhm,
right? Because they're negatively charged on the outside. They repel each other. If you lose the charge because the sodium potassium can't distribute, then
mhm,
you have a dead battery and the tissues all clump together, like you see with cancer cells,
mhm,
because the tissue is dead because there's
mhm,
no charge.
mhm.
So why did that happen? Well, then you have to know where that distribution comes from. It turns out nature is so ingenious that it made the gels inside our tissues just the right size. Imagine like a screen, and it's just the right size to trap potassium and exclude sodium.
Hmm.
So you don't have to add any energy or anything. All you have to do is make the gel, and the size of the gel automatically holds on to potassium, gets rid of the sodium, thereby creating the charge.
Mhm.
Now, that led to another discovery. Well, how do you make the gel? Well,
Right.
you get just the same as you make it in jello. You take proteins, right? Gelatin proteins, you put it in water, nothing happens, right?
Right. Right.
You heat it. What happens then? The proteins get unfold.
Denatured.
Well, maybe
Okay.
they
Unfolded.
unfold.
Unfolded.
And then that allows those unfolded proteins, they go from like this to like this. The water sticks to it because it's open. And then when it cools, it makes jello. So the same thing happens in us. We have intracellular protein skeleton. It's probably actin, but we don't really know that for sure. It's folded up, and then you put a Bunsen burner in it, and it unfolds. The water sticks to it, and at body temperature, it's a gel. The problem is what I just said, we don't have a Bunsen burner.
Right.
So there has to be something that plays the role of Bunsen burner,
Is this
and
going to be exercise?
that's called ATP.
Mm,
Now, people erroneously think that ATP gives you energy.
mm,
It's the energy currency they say, made by the mitochondria in the cristae of the mitochondria, where the, electron transport chain is. All that's a bunch of hooey. But you do make this substance which binds to the end of the proteins, and then they unfold like it's like a blinds of a drapes. You twist the handle, and the whole thing goes open. They twist it the other way, the whole thing goes shut. So you bind a certain binding site. Well, that's assuming there's actually molecules, but it's an energetic thing, really. And that unfolds the proteins. The water sticks to it, allows it to form this gel. The gel hangs on to the potassium, excludes the sodium. You get a charge and you get a normal function. If you don't have the ATP, or you don't have the right proteins, or you've got poisons that are interfering with the gel, right? You got poisons dissolved in your water, so they can't form a proper gel. You don't form the gel, you don't get a charge, you're dead.
okay. I need you
That's
to
how it
repeat that.
works.
Oh, I need you to repeat that last piece really because it's like if we have missing pieces, this won't happen. And before you answer that, I want to back up to something Dr. Paul Anderson said, which was that those with cancer are incredibly dehydrated. Like that's always the case in cancer that people are dehydrated. And the conversation is that structured water exclusion zone, water coherent water is found in the human body and in nature in abundance. So feel free to correct me, but it's like a cucumber is full of structured water. All plants are full of structured water. Um,
That's everything that's living is
structured.
only structured water.
Okay.
That's
Uh,
the definition of life.
yes. So
There is
structured water
urine.
equals hydration
Well,
because it because it
insofar as so, I mean, the problem with that statement is if he's talking about the quantity of water, that's has nothing to do with it. It's the state of the water.
yeah.
Now, by the way, if you go to your medical doctor or your oncologist and say, I heard this idiot Cowan on the thing on the teeth, on the podcast, and he says that cancer has to do with a defect in your structured water in your tissues. What do you think of that? No, you're right. Cowan, he's an idiot. He doesn't know anything about cancer is genetic. Got it. By the way, doc, I think I have a tumor. How should we diagnose it? Well, we should do an MRI, right? Because then we'll find out if you have a tumor. So what does an MRI measure, doc? Well, it measures whether you have a tumor. Yeah, I know that, but like, what is it actually measuring? I don't know. So you go to the radiologist. So you're going to do an MRI on me to see if I have cancer. What is the MRI actually measuring? I don't know. And that's weird, right? So this guy who's supposedly a cancer doctor does a test and he doesn't even know what the test is measuring. You know what it's measuring?
I have no idea.
The quality of the structured water in your tissues. And when it deteriorates, in other words, becomes like a puddle or like a hardened, irregular form, right? Those are the two ways it could dissolve or it could, you know, be misshapen. That the MRI picks up a signal saying this isn't right, and then it integrates it in the computer to show you an image that's a different color than a normal structured water. And that's how they know it's a tumor. So the very way that they find the cancer is by assessing the quality of the structure of your water, and they don't even know it.
I wonder how the person who knows what an MRI is actually defines it. Like if we go back, and I feel like
He
you're always
said, I've read his work. He said, I figured out a way to get a signal based on the bond angles and the coherence of the water. That's how he did it.
mm, that was not preserved in the hand-me-downs of
I
information
mean, they don't know it because they're scientifically illiterate.
because you don't have to know it. Okay, so when we talk about, is this statement true? If structured water leads to better hydration in the cells, or it's the only, I mean, it's not really true if all water in living form is structured. This is like something I hear in circles talking about this. Like, you have to drink structured water, otherwise, you're not getting hydration. Some of the same conversation is made about having minerals in water. And actually, I'm really just challenging my beliefs in general about how much water is needed to be consumed on a daily basis. Because it seems when you're adding minerals to your water, you need to consume much less than if you're not adding minerals to the water. And this is actually blowing open the conversation, the feelings I have about potassium and sodium. So I'm going to share something I see with most people. It's that most people feel more energy, and there's a variety of symptoms that improve when they consume more potassium. And for a long time, I've been referring to the sodium potassium pump. And so I'm thinking
Now,
about,
let me stop you there.
yeah, yeah,
So how do they consume potassium?
through food based sources.
So how do you know that it's the potassium in the food that's making them feel better?
And not the rest of the foods?
Yeah, if somebody comes along and you see, this is the same issue I have. People say, when I eat saturated fat, that's when I had a heart problem.
But they're
So,
missing the rest of the nutrient?
so I asked them, what did the saturated fat taste like? And they say, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, if I eat like a banana, I can tell you sort more or less, I don't it's hard to describe, but what a banana tastes like, or a steak, or a hot dog, or a beet, or or an orange. So what is it? If you say you ate a saturated fat, what did it taste? Well, I didn't actually eat a saturated fat. What did you eat? I ate butter.
Yeah.
So what is the percentage allegedly of saturated fat in butter? I don't know. Well, it's about 20%,
Mhm.
something like that. So how do you know if so you're saying you ate butter and you got a heart attack. Is that
Right.
right? Yeah. So how do you know it wasn't the other 80%?
Yeah.
So if somebody eats a banana, you say, "Oh, I feel much better." And you claim that it's potassium, you don't have a clue that that's right.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, when people tell you like saturated fat makes this happen, I automatically think of all these other scenarios of like why they may feel or not feel better. We probably
Well,
think of different things.
it's extremely sloppy way of describing what they ate because they didn't eat a saturated fat and nobody eats potassium. And even if you go into how do you prove that atoms exist and all that, I can guarantee you wouldn't be able to do that. So it's a misleading way of looking at the world.
I want
And by
to
the way, there's no guarantee or actually any information that drinking structured water makes the water in you structured. Like, in fact, there's reason to think that's not the way it would be.
Well, that's probably a pretty important point. Let's go there next because that's automatically how our human brains sometimes operate. Like, oh, this thing is good for me. I must take this thing. Before I do that, I want to ask you about the process in making the gel when the protein unfolds. You were talking about photo, there's no photo of the sodium potassium pump. Is there evidence of the whole unfolding of the protein to create a structured gel inside of us? Is there like lots of proof of this?
There's not lots of proof. There's some lines of evidence, and it's a good point. It's possible that's not actually the way it works, but it seems to be that it is a good point. So what's accurate to say is something happens energetically that allows us to create structured water. And it seems to have something to do with proteins because if you put it in an experimental system with no proteins, it won't form structured water.
Mm.
And in fact, if you do it in an experimental system, you have to add something like ATP to get that to happen. It's like a catalyst.
Yeah,
But that doesn't prove that's what happens in us. So,
yeah.
yes, it is to a certain extent unproven, but it may be possible. Let's say it like
Okay. Well, let's jump to what might be important to talk about next. So you're describing, if I was to sum up structured water in a very much of a micro definition, it's a fourth phase of water, perhaps a gel-like structure that doesn't require a membrane to be as kind of a boundary, and it's in
it's a
all living
certain
things.
pH, it's negative charge, and has a bunch of other characteristics which Pollock has, very clearly and carefully elucidated.
Okay. I want to talk about, well, you just talked about how structured water comes to be. Different places I have learned things about structured water have said in nature it becomes structured as it goes around and spins around things in nature as water goes, like travels through a stream. Do you have any comments on that? And then I want to talk about how the concept of consuming structured water for a moment and how do we validate if structured water can be structured? I mean, I have been given a structured water device, and when used according to directions, I felt that there was a smoother taste to the water that I used the device on than not. But I've also been given other devices that supposedly structure water, and I was like, I cannot tell the difference here whatsoever. So, what do you think?
So there movement of water, particularly in vortexing patterns, according to Pollock's experiments, increases the structure of the water. That means it increases the percentage of water that's in this gel phase, the number of layers of. And the simplest experiment is you get a beaker of water and you suspend a horizontal hydrophilic tube, which is like a protein tube, right? And in the so that if the tube is in water, it will form a gel layer on the inside of the tube, just by the interaction of water and hydrophilic surfaces. And you can prove that because you can stick a pH meter in and you can measure the intensity, the pH, and the physical characteristics of this gel like water. And then you can do experiments. You can watch the water move in the tube. And the reason it moves in the tube is because if the gel layer is negatively charged, then that means the positive charges have to go into the water
Okay.
and they repel each other and start moving, right? And so then you can measure the velocity of the water in the tube, and that gives you an idea of s- the strength of the gel layer or the size of it, the quantity of it. And then you can vary the beaker, like you can expose it to sunlight, and that will increase the gel layer, speed up the movement. You can put the beaker on the earth, and that will increase the gel layer, speed up the movement. So if you want to structure the water in a living system, you expose yourself to sunlight and that structures the water in you. And you can measure that with certain devices. You can put your feet on the earth, so called grounding, and that will increase the structured water content percentage in you. You could try different minerals and that will increase or decrease. If you put your cell phone next to the beaker, the water stops moving because it destructures the water. So if
Um,
you want to have destructured water, just carry your cell phone around in your pocket.
so I'll summarize, but first, you said you can measure the structuring that's happening in the body through grounding and getting sun exposure. How do you measure the
There's devices
increased?
that measure the intensity or the quality of the structured water in your tissues.
I'm trying to imagine what these might be called or how they would measure this.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of the device, but there are many different ones. I mean, that's something Pollock has done experiments with this, so you can look that up.
Okay. So to have water in the phase it's meant to be in our body, we have to expose ourselves to the ions, I guess negative ions from grounding, get exposure to
And
sunlight
minerals,
and
the
minerals.
minerals, and you have to have adequate protein, the right kind of protein. You have to have the right kind of, distilled water doesn't gel. We're near like iced water. You have to have an energy source, which may be a chemical energy source, or it may be UV light or sunlight or earthing or laying on of hands. Other living beings all provide different energy sources.
Mm. That was going to be the question is what do you say to people who are living in dark, low, low light climates, sometimes for days, or Alaskans that are in a mostly dark state use alternative energy sources?
So different foods concentrate and essentially store UV light like fats.
Mm.
So essentially that's why they eat high fat, high like seal blubber diets because they're essentially, using the stored fat.
Okay, that makes sense. So, cell phones, are we using the word EMF would destructure the water in our
So
body?
essentially the energy source is if you don't have an energy source, like if you put this beaker of water and if you put it in a lead box, it stops moving because there's no outside energy to help structure the water. So we live in a electromagnetic environment, right? And so far as we harvest that electromagnetic energy to run our system, we essentially have antenna that download that goes into our water and structures the water. So if you're cut yourself off from the electromagnetic field of the earth, you're not going to do well.
I'm just thinking about, I mean, you've talked about how cancer cells basically clump up because I'll try to say it like this. Maybe they don't have structured water, right? Is that a way I could say it?
So essentially what happens is you poison the organism, right? And the organism just says, I've got to put this poison somewhere out of the way because I can't excrete it all. So it puts it in a tissue like a breast tissue. That poisonous stuff, of whatever it is, disturbs the ability of the breast to make normal, structured, healthy breast tissue. And so now you have essentially a bag of debris, and that's called a tumor with all these disorganized cells, et cetera. It's actually not that different than if you have a house and somebody puts garbage in the foyer of your house.
Mhm.
Most people will take a bag and put the garbage in the bag and then put it in the garage. And eventually they'll take it out. That's what your body does. If you fill it with garbage, you put it in a bag, put it in a usually not vital place like your garage or your breast or your prostate, not in your brain or heart or liver.
Mhm.
Now, if you keep putting more and more garbage, then you get more and more bags and you start putting it in your spare bedroom and then the living room and then the dining room and then your master bedroom and then the kitchen and you move because you can't live in the house anymore. That's called metastases, right? Now, they say that the tumor cells crawl from the garage to this master bed to the spare bedroom,
Mm.
right? So they crawl or swim through the bloodstream from your breast to your liver or your brain or wherever else, right? That's what they tell you.
Sure.
So if they tell you that, go to your oncologist and say, can you show me the tumor cells in my blood? Because obviously that's how they got there. No. Why not? Well, they're not enough to see. So how do you know that it swam from my breast to my liver? Well, how else did it get there? Just like how else did the garbage get from your garage to your bedroom? It must have crawled, right?
Mm.
Even though one never sees bags of garbage crawling from the garage to the bedroom.
Mhm.
That's because they don't crawl. And there is no metastasis. There's just new storage place because the original place got full. Once that happens and you put garbage in the tissue, it can't structure the water. There's no charge. Now you have dead, disorganized, stinky, nasty tissue, otherwise known as cancer.
Mm.
And that's all there is to it.
So what if there's bags
And by the
of
way, if you look at every successful natural therapy, Gerson diet, Rife machine, you know, Kelly diet, detoxing saunas, sweat lodges, coffee enemas, everything. They all do the same thing. Get rid of your garbage.
I mean, I do agree that garbage is a big problem for cancer. And so I want to ask if you've got a bag of garbage in the garage and the spare bedroom and maybe the living room. I mean, that's significant, serious, right? Like the garbage is overflowed from the garage, so now you need a new place to put the garbage.
You got a problem.
Yeah, you got a problem. So it's sort of like this works a lot better in prevention. Like, don't let the garbage accumulate would be the easiest thing. It seems like it would be to do. However, in the nature of humans, we tend to, zoom in on things when they start to affect us, right? Like sometimes we're not touched by things until the garbage is everywhere. And so I don't know exactly what the question is, but what advice do you have to a person who's kind of got garbage in lots of rooms?
So, a while back, my college age daughter shared with me that she was tossing and turning and waking up several times per night after a period of stress. We started her on magnesium, and her sleep immediately improved. I personally think magnesium should be your first thing to try if you're having trouble sleeping or staying asleep, especially tossing and turning. And it's a no brainer if you have any restless leg issues. The thing about magnesium is that there's a lot of types of magnesium that will give you symptomatic relief, but I like to steer my clients and loved ones to a more absorbable form of magnesium because most big box magnesium is mag citrate, and that will push bowels, but it can be damaging to your teeth if it's used daily and it's not the most absorbable. Rather, Jigsaw Health makes one of my favorite great tasting magnesium powders called Mag Soothe that has magnesium glycinate, my favorite calming and absorbable type of magnesium. It's available in both a great tasting powder and to go packets. And they also make a product that's great for slow release, especially if you have restless legs, called Mag SRT. So, if you are not falling asleep easily or if you have disrupted sleep, you can try at least 200 milligrams of great magnesium like Mag Soothe or Mag SRT, especially if you have restless legs. It works better to take this at least 20 minutes before you go to bed to allow it to kick in. And you can get a discount on all of Jigsaw's amazing products, including Mag Soothe, at Jigsaw Health with the code LessStress10. Now, you can use LessStress10 as many times as you want with every order at Jigsaw Health, which is honestly pretty unheard of with coupon codes. So enjoy the magnesium from Jigsaw with my code LessStressed10.
Start getting the garbage out. If you don't know how to do it, work with somebody who understands this process, of which, by the way, there are very few people. But, we have a online clinic called the New Biology Clinic, and we all think like this. I don't actually see patients anymore, or members, we call them. But we've had a number of people who've had like stage 4 melanomas and other, so-called incurable or terminal or end stage cancer who have recovered, and we have scans to prove it. Because once you understand the nature of what you're working with, now the tricky part is the garbage can be lots of things. Can be food garbage, water garbage. It can be emotional garbage and psychic garbage and trauma garbage and the way you see the world garbage and thinking garbage. Like if you think there's viruses and you think that you have an immune system, that's garbage because you're living in a make believe world. And the way I describe this process, imagine this, I think, imagine because I like cats, right? So imagine you have this cat, and I have this cat, and he goes outside and he sniffs the air and he looks around and his tail goes up. His tail's an antenna. And he goes like this. And he sort of just kind of gets a sense of what's out there, because there's coyotes and bears and there's birds that he wants to chase and et cetera. Right. And then decides where he's going to go. Right. Imagine you told his name is Pumpkin. Pumpkin, by the way, there's a thing that's out there that's going to get you. It's your real danger, but you can't see it, smell it, feel it, or sense it in any way.
Mm,
What's he going to do?
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know if the cat cares or if he's gonna run and hide, I suppose. It
he would
depends on
run and
his
hide.
mannerisms.
He wouldn't be able to live like that because he would have no felt sense of where he stands. And you cannot live like that, except that's where 99% of Americans are living. they think there's all these things which they have no sense of. The viruses are going to get you. There's this going to get you. All these things are going to get you. And you don't have any sense of whether they're actually even true or how to know whether they're there.
Mhm.
You are in a very vulnerable position. And that means you're stressed, right? Because you could get any time, and that's the way. So you live in fear, just like Pumpkin would live in fear, not knowing if the next move, something he can't see, is going to get him. That's where people are these days. And so they have to go back and live in reality. And that's the sort of root of the problem.
But you've got to challenge everything you believe about reality, so it's going to take some.
It's going to
Gonna be,
take some time, right? Because we've been so conditioned not to believe our senses.
mm,
Whereas you look at traditional people who, by the way, rarely, if ever, in fact, seemingly never got cancer, and you told him, a traditional Native American, well, it's like Pumpkin, and you got these enemies out there and you can't see them or smell them or anything, they wouldn't believe you because they can't live like that. Once you convince somebody that that's their reality, they're a goner.
it's
And that's
unfortunate.
where everybody is at.
It's unfortunate that we've had quite an experiment for this for a few years. So it makes this like more of a visceral example that you've provided.
You got this danger, it's going to kill you, right? You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it. You have no idea, and you don't even know how anybody knows it's there.
Mhm.
And so your only default position is fear.
Mhm.
And fear is probably the biggest toxin there is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued. I wonder how much I agree with you that thought garbage and emotional and trauma garbage is all a significant issue. And it would be interesting to know how that may affect structuring. And in a way, this is kind of the examples. I don't know who did the studies on like people talking negatively to plants. I mean, it's kind of the what they saw, right? Like they spoke
Yeah,
nice things to one plant and they spoke negative things to another plant, and that's kind of the concept of plants are all structured water, right? And so
right.
it's a very easy thing. I remember I had this peace lily named Paco, and I left him alone for like a week, and I came to him and he was like so sad, and I gave him water and he came back to life. And for me, I'm like, okay, I can see like this is
Right.
like my thought around like making sense of structured water. So I have a question about the energy sources that support structuring. You brought up the sunlight, you brought up grounding, you brought up, foods that store UV light like fats, you brought up laying of the hands. Are there any other energy sources? Like, for example, does red light play a role in supporting structuring in the human
I mean,
body?
red light is a part of sunlight,
Yeah, true. So
and it may be the
any
part that
wavelengths,
specifically structures the water.
maybe. Like just a offhand statement, or you're like, huh, it might actually like this actually is
Now,
kind of maybe
there's a
important.
lot of research on the energetics of red light therapy, and I've used it myself, and I only use red lights like as sleeping lights, and I have a red light sauna. There's a lot of evidence for increasing the charge
Mhm.
of a person through red light therapy. But
Well,
I don't think it's the only part of the sunlight that actually, has a beneficial effect.
yeah. Well, I'm probably gonna miss misspeak about this for you, but when we think about the ingredients to make structured water, you brought up ATP, proteins, and the specific type of protein.
Ions
Yes, ions, but
and water.
yes, and water. And with red light, essentially the mechanism in research is that it increases ATP. And whether or
Right.
not we believe that, it's one of the pieces of the puzzle that you gave us for structuring.
Right. It seems
So,
to be the only organelle that's real in a tissue is mitochondria, and they seem to be red light receptors.
mm.
So that it could be.
On this note, since we're on the topic of light a little bit, probably multiple wavelengths of light, probably multiple types of light could support structuring, maybe red light. Which are there lights or lights that people that would unstructure or destructure? I don't know how we say it. Unstructure, destructure. Because there's
I
a
mean,
conversation about
lights
LED
from
lights.
computers, flickering lights from computers.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's just the light or the whole electromagnetic frequencies, but something in that mix destructures the water. You
Mhm.
could see that because when you put that next to this beaker of water, it stops the water from moving.
How, from your visual eyes, you cannot see that water stopping and starting moving? So how do you know if it
You
starts?
can. I mean, you can measure it with a velocity measuring device. So you see the flow.
Okay. Let's talk about devices. You've offered that nature is the perfect structuring device, somewhat. Those were not your words. That's just what I'm taking from it. Nature is the perfect structuring device. What about all the devices on the market that advertise structuring? I mean, you did talk about a tube and you kind of went through that. And there are some tubes on the market that supposedly structure water. But what's your in general thought process about devices that promise to structure water?
I mean, it depends on what they're saying and what the process, what they're using. So, for instance, we carry a device called an analemma wand,
Mhm.
which is, supposedly highly structured water in this quartz tube. I know the guy who came up with it. I've seen his years of experiments with watering plants and feeding animals this different water and the biological changes that they get. So those are the studies that actually I care about. Like you take this water that's stirred with this one and you feed these 100 tomato plants, and the other 100 tomato plants are exactly the same conditions best you can. And the only variable is the water. And you see a dramatically different result. And that's what he did. So you can do that plants, animals, and find out if there's biological differences. Now, that doesn't tell you it's because it's structuring the water, but it tells you that there's some changes in the water as a result of stirring this water.
Yeah, this is also what I have. And I would do several blind tests and be like, "Can you tell the difference?" And people would be like, "That one tastes better. That one
Yeah,
tastes smoother.
right.
That one tastes different." I did have, like I said, a different device, and I was like, "I cannot tell anything
Right.
from
So,
this."
so some of them seem to work and others don't. And, most people either don't really test, which is not a good idea because you can't really tell. You can tell a little bit about the smoothness, but you have to do tests and you have to do the only experiments that I pay any attention to anymore are with actual organisms with how they do,
Hmm.
not whether it changes the ATP or the
Sure.
proteins or any of that stuff. That all mean or cell cultures, none of that means anything. You get this 10 cats and they can jump this high and run for this long, and you feed them this water and they can run twice as long and they seem happy and sleep better. And you measure their parameters, so to speak, and you record it and observe it and see what you see.
Hmm.
That's how I do it.
Well, on that note, if someone was trying to test some things, if they incorporated a structured water device, and NLM has a whole home structured water device, I feel like anything can happen. So there would be lots of potential, like that would be the only input you could have. And it's like, what are all the things that you could test around this? So the real question is like, how would you encourage someone to test for themselves whether this is making a viable difference for them?
It's the same question I asked every patient when they came back. I told them, they said that they have this and they have that or whatever they have. And then I would say, do this, eat this way, move this way, whatever I told them, stir your water, something. They come back in a month. How's your life? It's better. So convince me that it's better. I'm sleeping better. I'm getting along with my wife better. My foot doesn't hurt anymore. Used to be my knee was twice the size of the other knee, and now it's normal. And I used to not be able to walk very much, and now I can walk normal. and my work is going well and I made more money and everything's good.
Mhm.
And, it also takes practice to know that because, like you can put somebody comes in, they say they're depressed,
Mhm.
right? So tell me about your life. Well, I'm not getting along with my wife and I'm not doing well at work and think I'm going bankrupt, et cetera. And I'm really depressed. So you give them an antidepressant, right? That's what they do. Comes
Mhm.
back in a month. How you feeling? Oh, much better. Not depressed. So how's your wife? Oh, we got divorced. How's your job? Oh, I got fired. How's your finances? Oh, I went bankrupt. So what happened? Their life isn't better. They just are numb.
Mhm.
That's the difference. So I'm interested. Convince me what's different about your life and don't prejudice the witness. If it's worse, it's worse. If it's better, it's better.
Yeah. So there could be
That's it.
multiple things.
And so I'm not saying look for sleep, look for this. And the more you see, that gets to the other point I said. We don't even know how to know whether we're better. Now, I can tell you, I've gone essentially 40 years without a blood test or a physical exam or any outside input into how I'm doing. I decided I'm just going to figure it out based on how I feel. And if I don't think I'm doing right, I'm going to eat differently, move differently, think differently, walk differently, sleep something, change my mattress pad, something.
Mhm.
And what happens is you practice assessing over your lifetime. That's normal human behavior. But
Mhm.
we've been convinced not to do that. So people say, are you better? I have no idea.
Mhm.
My doctor said my A1C is 5% worse. So I must be worse.
Mm.
You
I
you
I agree with you
outsourced your
about
power.
this. Yeah, I agree with you completely about this. I think once you harness the skill and develop the skill of assessment and awareness, which could be the same, I guess, for me, I think that you're a bit unstoppable. Like, there's nothing that I think that's when things really open up for
Yeah.
possibility. I think this
Yeah.
is where
Because you're in control.
right, exactly. This puts you in control to be able to be aware and to assess and to the other piece of that which you said in different words is to practice that without expectation sometimes because I think we have to collect sometimes failures like sometimes this experiment didn't work or the way I wanted it to and I have to be neutral about that and adjust
Most
based
of the
on some
things, they don't work,
Mhm.
which is good because then you found that didn't work.
Yeah, exactly. It's just as much every experience is a success is a Louise Hay quote that I actually really love.
Yes.
I was reading some reviews of your book and the reviewers were praising some things and I wanted to draw this out. I thought this was a really beautiful thing. And this is something that I've come to quite often that's absolutely on the heels of this last point you just offered, like outsourcing your power and reharnessing your power really. So I had done lots of coaching around thoughts, and I find I always have to be renewing the mind to ask better questions. And so, very often, I'm sure you saw this all the time too, but very often people say, should I do this or should I do that? And so, one of the reviews for your book said, the question is really, am I asking the wrong question or what assumptions am I making that may be incorrect? I call it let's ask ourselves, the quality of our question determines the quality of the answer quite often. Is this something that you talk a lot about in your book or with in your education about asking these I mean, I feel that this is kind of the premise of how you've arrived at where you are is like being an obscene questioner overall.
Well, I ask a lot of questions. I mean, I have a very specific strategy. When I hear something that I'm interested in and I don't know, I ask every question I can think of to get the full perspective of the person who's telling me whatever they're telling me. And then I repeat it back, ask them to correct me of anything that I got wrong.
Mm.
And I did that basically with every patient encounter, I ask them all kinds of questions except why. I never ask somebody why they're sick because A, they don't know, and B, that's my job. So, when did your foot hurt? What does it feel like? How did this come about? Anything you could tell me about when your foot started hurting or what it feels like. And then I would tell it back to them and ask them if I got it right. And I would usually that process would unlock their understanding of what happened.
In the vein of asking yourself good questions, I'm going to just quickly verbally summarize our conversation as I saw it play out a little bit. We talked a little bit about defining structured water as the fourth phase of water in general as a gel, even though if you're using something like an analemma wand, I would say that the water does not appear to be a gel, but that was the analogy that was used. We talked about how cancer cells kind of clump together. So we talked a touch about hydration, how a sodium potassium pump is not validated and proven. We talked more importantly about potentially how to make this structured water, what the ingredients are to make that. We talked about natural inputs from nature on how to improve structuring potentially in living organisms, including ourselves. We talked about what robs us of structured water, which we kind of summarized to electromagnetic fields. And I would wonder if there's other pollutants that really compromise structure also as well. So we talked about those pieces. And we talked just a bit about devices, specifically about one that we both have. Is there anything that you would want someone that's listening to this to know about structured water that we did not mention? Or is there a question that you would, and maybe it's just something you've already said, is there a question you would leave them with to kind of chew on as they kind of go forth in their own journey?
I mean, if you start learning about water, you'll start learning about life.
Mm,
So I would just, if you haven't ever thought about it or looked into it, start looking into water.
mm, cool. It's a kind of a big topic. I agree.
Big topic because it's
Big,
life.
yeah, big
Without
topic.
water, there's no life.
Yeah. So much to talk of. So many questions I get all the time about water quality, etc. So thanks
Yeah.
for resurfacing structured water for me. This was a topic I visited at least 18 months ago with a wand that's on my shelf.
Yeah.
So it's something I'll have to decide what my own tests are going to be on the outside and determine what I think works. Thank you very much for coming on today.
Okay. Thank you.
Bones, but they just keep breaking.